Do you ever get that feeling that you're making the same mistake over and over? Maybe a little bit different times in your life, different people that you make the mistake with. But ultimately, you've hit midlife and you're looking back and you're like, what is it about the fact that I can't seem to learn my lesson around this thing? Well, guess what, my friends? This is a real phenomenon. And it goes back to a little bit of what we talked about last week. When you're trying to be safe, you do get stuck. And if you want to get unstuck, you'll want to keep listening today. Welcome back, everybody. It is the final in this series, the final podcast in this series that I have on all of the main issues that seem to bubble up to the surface for women in midlife. So if you've been listening, you have heard that we have talked about how to thrive in midlife. And that's really what this whole series has been about. We're trying to help you show up to midlife in a way that helps you thrive and get into that centered life that you want instead of a midlife crisis, right? That we'd like to avoid that at all costs. Kind of really the theme behind my podcast in general is if I can get this information out to you in a different format, maybe I won't have to meet with you across the couch for how many hours of therapy to help you navigate these things, because I sure would like to help women preventatively figure out kind of here's where the vulnerabilities are going to be going into midlife. Here's what I think you should be doing to kind of prevent that from happening and even pivot into like the strongest, best part of your life. Because I really do believe that is what midlife can be. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. I still encourage you, though, to go to the notes for today's podcast or any of the podcasts prior to this that have been part of this series. Click on the link to get your free half-hour one-on-one coaching session with me, because we will individually go through all of these areas that I talked about over the last several weeks, and we will help you have an individualized plan. So not just the general recommendations that I'm making here on the podcast, all of which are great and all of which I strongly suggest you employ. I also want you to be coming to me and getting that individual look at your life, like really kind of looking at in these areas. So what are these areas? We've talked about navigating midlife in a way, showing up to your midlife in a way that helps you to thrive in relationships, with hustle culture, with your finances and how that creates stress, and some underlying feelings of just not feeling good enough. And with your major health issues, right? So these are all significant things that if you went on the Googler, you would find are the main things that women are struggling with at this stage in their life. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is one of the things that I think kind of is the umbrella over the whole thing. Women in midlife often feel like they get stuck in cycles of doing things, making the same mistakes, running up against the same problems over and over again. So this is the kind of stuff that we are seeing ourselves do: the people pleasing, the not feeling good enough, the overemphasizing serving others over balancing that with the self-care and having that distance between you and me, that ability to love you and love me simultaneously, not having that kind of boundary. These are the kinds of things that really get in the way for women. But what's kind of overarching that entire thing is that we have never been acculturated, taught, and certainly aren't given the kinds of supports around the idea of personal development, around the idea of personal growth, or just doing our own work. Okay. So I think in therapy, that's kind of how we talk about it a little bit more is do your work. You know, if you do the work of understanding why you tick the way that you do, why you do what you do when you do it, all of a sudden you're navigating life at a whole different level with a whole different level of self-awareness. And of course, I'm going to harp on again that I'm not just looking to help you build self-awareness. I want you to build compassionate self-awareness, right? I want you to really see yourself and be able to say, okay, I get it. I get why I've been participating in my own suffering that way. it's okay. Like, I'm not mad at myself. I'm not going to get out the whip. The mean girl doesn't get to have a say in this. I am going to show up to this differently because I'd like to change it moving forward. I would like to get out of my own way and do my work so that I can move forward. So one of the common things that you'll start to see for women in midlife is that they all start doing, some variation of looking at things they're regretting. And either they're going to get stuck in that, double down, and keep doing the same thing. That's that rut or stuckness that I'm referring to. Or they're going to go for that personal growth. Now, some of us feel thrown into this, like a major loss, a major change, a divorce, a career shift, or kids aging. Some significant change may kind of push us in that direction faster than we expected to be, having to do something like that. In general, though, what I am looking to help women to do is to really just name this and step into it and want it for themselves. That's what I'm looking for, ladies. I want you to want to do the personal growth, to want to design a life that you want to be living in. And in order to do this, you need to be staying on top of your own work. You have to look at some of those places we don't like to look at, those stuck places where we're participating over and over again in the same things, the same mistakes that aren't working out for us. And I know you know that these are there. So as always, let me tell you a story. Let me put this let me put this into a picture for you. And boy, do I have the picture for you. So it was about 5 years ago now, and I was in a 6-year marriage at the time. I think we had been together for a little over 7 years. And I knew that there was some financial troubles that were happening. I mean, that was not news to me. And while my ex was out of town for a couple of weeks, there was a knock on the door. And the knock on the door ended up being two individuals that came into my house to tell me that my house was in the foreclosure sheriff sale process. And even though I knew that there was something of this nature that possibly was coming down the pike, I had no idea that it was like in the imminent future. For those of us that have had the unfortunate experience of going through something like this, usually these things take a great deal of time, right? And so you're not like surprised somebody knocks on your door. However, for me, that is exactly what happened. It was a knock on the door that rocked my world. And essentially, after that was the dissolution of that relationship, was, a whole financial upheaval and a starting over for me. Not great stuff, right? And I have to tell you that one of the things that occurred to me, it did occur to me, but also became glaringly obvious from the people that, well, honestly, people on both sides, people who were supportive of me and my kids, and people who were like, how did you get here? You know how you got here. I had people on both sides of that were telling me, like, essentially, either you were totally blind to this and totally lied to, or, you knew about it and you just didn't want to know about it. And I knew in my gut that it was the latter. I knew in my gut that I knew most parts of what was happening, but I had invested in not knowing what was happening too. This is a pattern that I have. Pattern that I learned from growing up in an alcoholic family. Okay. So there are these two things that I call them the gruesome twosome. There are these two things that happen when you live in a chronically stressful situation, like living at home with an alcoholic when you're a kid. And that is elusiveness. So being elusive, and illusion, right? And so to be elusive is to create your illusion, and illusion is what you believe to be true. And these are actually survival mechanisms. So you talk about this stuff, and people are, like I said, they fell in two camps. They either were on my side with it, or they really were quite judgmental towards me. And I towards myself in the beginning, like, Natalie, how could you do this again? Like, how did you get yourself stuck in not realizing this was happening to this extent yet again? There's a lot of acculturated judgment around using this survival skill. And yet we all do it. To some extent, we all do it. And it's natural. It's a natural part of our survival mode. Our brain can only take so much at one time, and it will need to distance itself emotionally or shut certain facts out that are not in our conscious awareness in order for us to get along. Now, this makes a ton of sense when something major happens. I just had a death in the family recently. And certainly I saw levels of this because it's quite natural, actually, after a major loss like that, especially an unexpected loss like this was for my family, that you kind of are doing the daily stuff, right, as a way to kind of have blinders on to the significant amount of negative emotion that's just kind of right under the surface for you, right? That's a normal way for the body and the mind to show up to a major significant change, loss, some sort of trauma that it's experiencing. And listen, people, trauma, and I'll talk about this in another podcast at some time, but trauma itself is not indicative of having to have a trauma disorder. So there's a lot in pop culture, there's a lot of overlap I see that is just not accurate clinically. Yes, indeed, every single one of us on this earth will go through a trauma or two or three or four or five or six in our lifetime. Will all of us develop trauma-based disorders? No, we won't. Some of us are resourced in a way that will go through the stages of grief and pivot through and not have that long-term problem of, knowing that I have this loss and trying to push it away. Over time, we're able to, bring the gap between thinking about it and not thinking about it closer together. We're able to process through it. We're able to feel the feels when they come and let them go. But some of us didn't get those resources. And if we did not get those resources, then what we do is a natural biological response. And that is to bring in our skills of elusiveness, or what we call clinically dissociation. So essentially what the brain is doing is it's separating itself. It's blocking off certain memories so they're not in your, like, right in front of you, you're not thinking about them, so that you can go about your day. So you can put one foot in front of the other and spoon up some cereal and put it in your mouth when you're going through a really difficult time. So that's that elusiveness that your body mind is doing subconsciously or unconsciously without your awareness. It's just going to do this because this is what it knows how to do to stay safe. And if you actually look up the definition of being elusive, one of the top definitions, like in Oxford Dictionary, is it's an act to actually protect yourself from a danger or protect yourself from a perceived threat. You're just like, I got to be elusive. I got to get around this. I can't have the danger right in front of me. So I'm going to kind of avoid it and go around it. Right now, what happens if you do that day in and day out and day in and day out is the truth or the belief that you have about things gets a little eluded. So the illusion then is not completely accurate. It's usually based in truth. It has lots of facts that go into its truth. But for sure, you guys, it's not the truth. And so when I had this experience for myself, I'll be damned that I had done a ton of work. I mean, I'm a therapist. And so I've talked about that on this podcast. I go to therapy. Like, that's just, I recommend it to any therapist that I do supervision and consultation for. I have been in therapy and in and out of therapy my entire adult life, and certainly my entire career as a psychologist. It's just good practice. But I had not touched yet on whatever was happening in my life in that particular marriage. And because of that, I had not done the work to not get myself into that pickle of having somebody knock on the door and really, for the life of me, not have known it was to that level. that it was going to be happening this quickly, and that the levels of things that I was not aware of had gotten to the level that it did. And part of that is that my protective factor, the illusion that I create when things feel threatening, is to tell myself, well, it won't be that bad. Or if it's not that it won't be that bad, it's that I'll be able to manage it. I'll be able to handle it. And these are two themes in my life that have come up over and over and over again. Now, on the surface of it, when I say that, it's kind of a resiliency factor. I don't want to totally throw that out, right? Like it is actually useful for me to believe, hey, it can get better, like helpfulness, right? And that helpfulness, right? That I have some ability to make that change. So having these two beliefs, great. But having that illusion sometimes clouds then me seeing things that fall outside those truths. And that was really what had happened during the course of my marriage. Just little by little, it was never an overnight thing, but just things eroded over time to the point where I was just going to work every day and taking care of the family and doing all of my things. I knew there was some stuff over here that was a problem. I believed that it was getting taken care of by my spouse. And so I didn't have a reason to question it. Although I did, and so there was some intuitive things that would happen, but my elusiveness was to push that intuition away because it was scary for me, and to stay in that comfort zone of the not knowing, because ignorance felt blissful, I guess, in that regard. So this gruesome twosome, elusiveness and illusion, otherwise clinically known as dissociating, is pretty common around things that feel like a perceived threat. And I don't mean that that threat has to feel like it's life or death, although it may be, but it's a perceived threat of some kind. And these two tend to be at the source of anything that I've helped the women that I've worked with in coaching really start to pick apart and see how it is that they've buried certain information and are repeating a same problem over and over. So like in any of my online courses or in any of my coaching packages, I have early in the process talk about this idea of self-awareness with a compassionate lens, because I know that this in particular, digging this thing apart, is a really hard thing to look at. So remember in my story, like people were really judgy. I lost friends. I lost, whole bunches of relationships where people just were like, listen, Natalie, you have a doctorate. Actually, just to make this story, to add insult to injury during this time in my life, I was going through mediation because we have a kid together, and it was a mediator of all things that came to me and was like, well, you have a doctorate. You have a doctorate. It's a very untrauma informed mediator. How is it possible that you didn't know this, this, and this, and this? Like I had to give her a little lesson like I'm giving you guys today, because apparently this had never occurred to her. And I'm hoping that it influenced her practice to the positive, because the way that she treated me, not trauma informed, certainly not kind in any way. But people really had a hard time thinking, Natalie's a really smart person. So there's just no way that this totally went without being seen. There must have been some participation. But that's where the judgment comes in, is that there's this idea that that participation is volitional. It is not. So the elusiveness that we create, or that behavior that we create, is a survival mechanism. It is subconscious or unconscious. This is not something that you're doing willfully. This is something that you're doing by biology. And that, my friends, is why having a compassionate lens, first of all, understanding those things, and education is a big part of what I do with coaching too, but understanding doesn't scratch the surface if you don't have this compassionate lens to be able to look at how I've participated in my own suffering, how I got myself in this mess, but still be kind to me, still be understanding towards myself, still understand that I'm only human, and still really give myself the gift of staying curious about it instead of judgy about it, of wondering, how did that happen yet again? You were in your mid 40s by then, my girl, early 40s. You were in your early 40s by then, my girl. Like, how is it possible that you had missed this piece? You've gone through a lot of therapy. Like, how is it possible that you didn't figure out that this was going to be a thing here? And staying curious is really the action of staying compassionately self-aware, because it's a non-judgmental way to stay self-aware. And that all of those things are things that I teach early on in any of my coaching packages or online programs for that reason. So, like, what does all this have to do with midlife? Well, what happens, I think, and what I have had the experience of with the many people that I've helped, is that it's this gruesome twosome of creating an illusion, kind of living that life, and the action of elusiveness that gets in the way of our moving in our personal growth and moving towards, being the person that we really want, designing the life that we really want to live. And if we're not compassionately self-aware and don't have the self-empowerment tools and the ability to care for ourselves right, we're not going to get in a growth mindset that allows us to stay in that curiosity continually, and it'll get in the way. So one of the things that comes up commonly is around kids aging out, like aging out of your homes. Like, there's an entire life that you create around being that role of the parent, parenting a young American child, teen American child, and then all of a sudden they're not right here in front of you. And if you need more information about my suggestions on how to handle that transition from transactional parent doing and meeting needs to a relational parent, building that underlying relationship with your adult children, go back to that golden, what is it? Mastering relationships in the second half of your life. And I think that might've been one of the first ones I did in this series. So go back and listen to that to get more particulars, but this is a common place where this comes up. What happens is, for self-protection reasons, we can't see that we've been self-sacrificing doing things for ourselves, because there literally wasn't enough time in the day to do that and parent, right? So women often choose kids over themselves. It's something they've been acculturated to do. There's religious values to this. There's family values to this. And over time, that elusiveness has created the illusion that their kids are their life. What rocks their world then when they hit midlife is, once those kiddos are out the door and that relationship has changed significantly, it bursts the bubble of that illusion. And the gruesome twosome is no longer going to work, my friends, because you can't just be elusive to it and work around it. You're going to have to start to face, there isn't a way to be the person I was. And so you have to start to find new ways to grow, personal growth, personal development, or find things in life that have meaning for you, or that you align with a purpose that you want to be doing, right? You can take the superpowers you've created being a parent and apply it in so many different ways. So it's not like anything was lost, but it definitely has to change. And what rocks people is that they were, they kind of created that illusion. They put up some blinders and didn't see that they were self-neglecting their own personal development for as long as they did. And so we start helping you with these two particular things, the elusiveness and the illusions that creates. We are helping you to bring compassionate self-awareness to that, to highlight, well, that makes a lot of sense you did that. There's only 24 hours in a day, and you were slotted with, 80% of the rearing in the situation that you're describing, or 40% of the rearing plus working a job in the situation you're describing. So of course, this is not like your young adult life where you had all this extra free time. This was like pedal to the metal. So it makes a lot of sense, but it also makes a lot of sense that your body and mind didn't want you to know you were self-neglecting, right? It didn't want you to see that you were pushing that stuff away and pretending it wasn't happening. So now what we have to do is build a new self-care skill that stays on top of that. We need to build some compassionate self-awareness that doesn't let you get too far down the pike in your self-neglect where you find yourself in a pickle. Because what can happen is if you don't deal with that underlying thing, you will shift all of that stuff that you used to do with the kids, self-neglecting, not feeling appreciated, not feeling heard and seen, because kids are the worst. Let me just be honest. Like, they are not here to give you accolades for parenting well. If you parent well, they probably never will say a dang thing. They just become the humans that you would like to see in the world. So it's not going to be reinforcing in that way. And oftentimes what gets paired up is just feeling like you've done all this self-neglect, you've sacrificed for them, not a lot of appreciation. If you don't get out of that pedal to the metal, put the blinders on, don't see the self-neglect and apply it to a new job, apply it to a new community service that you're doing it, apply it to your relationship with your spouse or your partner after your kids go out. None of that will serve you. None of that will serve you. You will be doubling down into the same problem again, right? It feels safe though. If you listen to last week's podcast, I talked about when we feel safe, oftentimes means we're going to be stuck, right? If we're reaching for safety, we are not necessarily reaching for growth because growth feels uncomfortable. And when the kids move out, we will want to grow. We will want to grow into an adult and into a life that we want to be living. We do not want to be stuck. But if we get down into the safety pieces or the comfort pieces of, I know how to do this way, then it's hard for us to extricate that. And this gruesome twosome definitely comes up over and over again in that way. So the antidote is pretty obvious, right? The antidote is personal growth, doing your work, right? There's a million different ways that you can do this, my friends. And truth be told, women tend to developmentally edge towards this regardless, without crisis. Don't necessarily need crisis, but some of us need a bigger shove to go this way. But many of us, what you'll see is that women in midlife are kind of looking for more purpose-driven careers, are switching things up like that. I can't tell you, going on this entrepreneurial journey of learn to love your story, I've been in a million different business coaching opportunities, some of them free, some of them paid for, and the number of women in my age group in these things, it's phenomenal. But it is consistent with this kind of like, it's a natural development that we want to grow. We do. We want to better ourselves, be more in alignment with a purpose, and adjust. But what will get in the way of this is that gruesome twosome, is the stuff you don't know that you do in that automatic unconscious way. And if you're not unearthing that, then the personal growth and development becomes really hard. And that's what's really unique about the Learn to Love Your Story program that's different than other life coaching. I do give you a fair amount of just life coaching tips, period. But what I am really trying to provide for you is the underpinning skill sets that let you continue to do this on your own. I want you to build the machine of personal growth that helps you keep on growing, not necessarily having to come back and see a person like myself and get that coaching. You might from time to time just for a little adjustment, but I want you to have the understanding of how the whole thing works under the surface. Because if that is the stuff that you build, then it won't matter what you're growing into, what your personal development is developing into, what your growth goals are. You have the skill sets underlying that help you rinse, repeat, and rinse, repeat, and rinse, repeat, and keep on doing that. So my programs really are focused on that journey for you. I don't want you just to find, your next purpose. I want you to find the skills that help you find a purpose when you feel purposeless. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm providing for you. That's what, if you want to click on the free 30-minute one-on-one coaching session, what we're going to do together. We're going to assess kind of where are your vulnerabilities and strengths. And I'm going to give you some really great individualized ideas for how you can start growing in this way. But the antidote really to this issue of the gruesome twosome, kind of undermining personal growth and doing your work. And during this life transition, when you have to grow, finding the means to be able to do so is all about learning those underlying personal growth and growth mindset skills. And there's all sorts of pieces that go to that you've heard me talk about on and off throughout this series. There's, making empowered decisions for yourself. There's compassionate self-awareness. There is having the extraordinary belief that self-care is this thing of, I want to stay in my life, not I want to escape from the stress of my life. That self-care really is about preserving the person you are in order to be able to slug it out and get in there and do it one more time, right? That's what we're trying to generate for you with Learn to Love Your Story. All the online courses, all the coaching packages, this freebie for you that's in the notes that you can click on to get a one-on-one session with me. All of that is geared at helping you have the skills to build that, not just help hand to you on a silver platter. Here's your next purpose. Go and be with the universe and get that done for yourself. What I want you to know is, how do you figure that out? When you feel backed in the corner, when the Band-Aid is ripped off, when the kids move out, when the job is lost, or you're laid off, or you're downsized, when you're going through that divorce, when somebody knocks on the door and rips open the fabric of the universe and shows you, hey, that illusion you created, yeah, that's not actually a thing. And you're going to have to reinvent this wheel. These are the skills that really help you to accomplish that. These are the skills that are going to help you be able to grow and be a better version of yourself, learn to love your story at any place that you are, pivot through any issue that happens to you at any point in your life. This stuff is great, you guys. And again, just to reiterate, my whole point in Learn to Love Your Story, in the Dr. Natalie podcast, all of this is to get this information out there to people before the bottom drops out. I don't want you to feel like you're, me getting that knock on the door. I don't want the bottom to fall out underneath your life for you to finally go in and talk to somebody. I want you to start this personal growth, this personal development journey right now. Do it for yourself. Keep listening to the podcast. Go to learntoloveyourstory.com and see what other resources that I have available. Some of them are free. Go to learntoloveyourstory.com and see what other resources that I have available, many of which are free in my blogs and my videos. And yeah, of course, I have online courses and other things. If that's something that you're interested in, I can certainly talk to you about that more. But honestly, I just want you to get the stuff. That's what I want. I want to not have us hit midlife crisis. So we want to go into that midlife mastery. We want to master our midlife. We want to thrive instead of feeling like we're surviving. And these are the skill sets, the things that I've talked about through this entire series. And I will have that freebie open for a period of time now. So please click on the link in the notes, sign up for your 30-minute freebie with me. Let's look at where your strengths and weaknesses are in this midlife crazy. And what can I suggest that you do to make sure that you're on this path, that you have the skills underneath you to be able to pivot through and to really design a life that you want to be living.